Ethan and Liam had always been inseparable, their bond forged in the crucible of a strict, conservative upbringing. They shared everything: secrets, dreams, and even the rare moments of rebellion against their overbearing parents. Now, as adults, their paths appeared to have diverged. Ethan, the more outgoing twin, was engaged to Sophia, a poised and graceful woman who epitomized everything their family valued. Liam, on the other hand, led a quieter, more withdrawn life, concealing a truth he had never dared to voice. Sophia was the picture of perfection in Ethan's life. She loved him deeply, believing they were building a future together rooted in trust and harmony. To outsiders, their relationship seemed flawless, and even Ethan tried to convince himself of the same. But beneath the surface, something stirred, a yearning that went against everything he had been taught to believe. When Ethan invited Liam to stay with him for a while, Sophia welcomed the idea without hesitation. She admired the bond the twins shared and thought it was natural for Ethan to miss his brother. Yet, as Liam arrived at their shared apartment, an unspoken tension filled the air. Ethan's eyes lingered on Liam a moment too long, and Liam's polite smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The brothers fell into old patterns quickly. They reminisced about their childhood and laughed over shared memories, but an invisible barrier separated them. For Liam, being around Ethan was both a comfort and a torment. He had always admired his brother, but as they grew older, that admiration had deepened into something far more complicated, something he had buried under layers of guilt and fear. Ethan, too, was struggling. The more time he spent with Liam, the more he felt a pull he couldn't explain, or perhaps didn't want to. He told himself it was nostalgia, a longing for simpler times. But late at night, when Sophia had gone to bed, Ethan found himself drawn to the kitchen where Liam sat with a cup of tea, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a single bulb. They would talk about everything and nothing, their words filling the silence that had once seemed insurmountable. Sophia began to notice small things. The way Ethan's demeanor changed when Liam was around. How he seemed more animated, yet strangely restless. At dinner, she caught fleeting glances between the twins, the kind that spoke of secrets she wasn't privy to. She brushed it off at first, chalking it up to their close relationship. But doubt started to creep in, planting seeds she couldn't entirely ignore. One evening, as Sophia praised Liam's wit and charm, Ethan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Liam looked down at his plate, his hands clenching into fists under the table. Sophia, oblivious to the undercurrent, continued speaking, her laughter filling the room. But for the brothers, the sound only heightened the tension. It was a fragile balance they were trying to maintain, each moment laden with the weight of unspoken truths. As the days passed, the lines between what was acceptable and what was forbidden began to blur. Late one night, as the household grew quiet, Liam sat alone in the living room, the dim light casting shadows across his face. He stared at the floor, lost in thought, when he heard soft footsteps approaching. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Without speaking, he joined Liam, sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You've been distant," Ethan said, his voice low. "What's going on with you?" Liam hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "I'm fine," he said, though the strain in his tone betrayed him. "No, you're not." Ethan's gaze was intense, searching Liam's face for answers. "We've always been honest with each other, Liam. Don't shut me out now." Liam looked away, his heart pounding. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? The feelings he had for Ethan were wrong. He knew that, but they were also undeniable. He had tried to suppress them for years, to distance himself, but being here, so close to Ethan, was tearing down the walls he had built. "You wouldn't understand," Liam finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Try me," Ethan pressed, his tone soft but insistent. Liam clenched his fists, the words catching in his throat. "It's complicated," he said. "You have a life, Ethan. You have Sophia. I don't want to ruin that for you." Ethan's brows furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. But then, as if a light had switched on, understanding dawned in his eyes. His breath caught, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Liam," Ethan's voice was filled with a mix of disbelief and something else, something raw and vulnerable. Liam shook his head, standing abruptly. I shouldn't have come here. This was a mistake. Ethan grabbed his wrist before he could leave, his grip firm but gentle. Don't do that, he said. Don't run away from me. Liam froze, his back to Ethan, and for a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of their breathing. Slowly, Ethan stood, stepping closer until they were inches apart. I've been feeling it too, Ethan admitted, his voice trembling. I didn't know what it was, but it's there. Liam turned to face him, his expression a mix of shock and anguish. You can't say that, he said, his voice cracking. You're engaged, Ethan, to Sophia. She loves you. I know, Ethan said, his voice heavy with guilt. But I can't ignore this anymore. I don't even know what it means, but I can't pretend it's not there. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. In a moment of weakness, Ethan reached for Liam, his hand brushing against his cheek. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down Liam's spine. But just as quickly as it happened, Liam pulled away, his eyes filled with pain. We can't, he said firmly. This isn't right. Ethan didn't argue, but the look in his eyes said everything. The bond they shared had crossed the line, and there was no going back.
The days that followed were a blur of tension and unspoken emotions. Liam tried to avoid being alone with Ethan, but it was impossible to maintain distance in such close quarters. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt like a spark reigniting the fire they were both trying desperately to extinguish. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling. He had always been the confident, assured one, but now he was plagued by doubts and guilt. His feelings for Liam consumed him, making it hard to focus on anything else, even Sophia. He found himself pulling away from her, their conversations growing shorter and more strained. Sophia noticed the change. At first, she thought it was wedding stress. Ethan had always been a little detached when under pressure. But this felt different. He seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere even when they were together. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and her instincts told her it had to do with Liam. One evening, as Sophia stood outside the room where the twins were talking, she caught fragments of their conversation. Their voices were low, almost urgent, and the tone was unlike anything she had heard from them before. I can't keep doing this, Liam's voice trembled. It's tearing me apart. We can figure it out, Ethan replied, his tone pleading. I don't want to lose you. Sophia's heart sank. The words were ambiguous, but the emotion behind them was not. She stepped away before they could see her, her mind racing. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the seeds of doubt had grown into a painful knot in her chest. Meanwhile, Liam had made up his mind. He couldn't stay any longer. The weight of his emotions and the fear of destroying Ethan's life were too much to bear. He began making plans to leave, though the thought of walking away from Ethan was almost unbearable. When Liam told Ethan he was leaving, Ethan's reaction was explosive. You can't just run away, he shouted, his voice thick with frustration and hurt. I don't have a choice, Liam shot back. I can't stay here and watch you marry Sophia while pretending this, whatever this is, never happened. It's not that simple. Ethan protested. I don't know what to do, but I can't let you go. Their argument was raw and emotional, years of suppressed feelings spilling out all at once. For Liam, it was a release of the pain he had carried for so long. For Ethan, it was a desperate attempt to hold onto the one person who truly understood him. But their voices had carried, and Sophia had heard everything. She stood frozen outside the door, her heart breaking as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of Ethan's feelings for Liam, but because he hadn't trusted her enough to be honest. That night, Sophia confronted Ethan. Her voice was steady, but her eyes brimmed with tears. What's going on between you and Liam? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Ethan couldn't bring himself to lie. His silence was all the confirmation Sophia needed. Sophia sat across from Ethan, the silence between them heavy and suffocating. Her expression was unreadable, her emotions buried beneath a calm exterior. Ethan couldn't meet her gaze. His hands fidgeted on the table, his mind racing to find the right words, though he knew no explanation could undo the damage. How long? Sophia finally asked, her voice cold and steady. Ethan hesitated, his throat tightening. It's not what you think, he said weakly, though he knew how hollow the words sounded. Then tell me what it is, she demanded. Because I heard enough to know that whatever it is, it's not something I can ignore. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to look at her. It's complicated, he began. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late. Sophia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. I love you, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I really do. But with Liam, it's different. I don't know how to explain it, but it's always been there. I never let myself acknowledge it until now. Sophia's face remained impassive, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. So, what does this mean for us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but found he didn't have one. How could he? He was torn between the life he had built with Sophia and the unspoken bond he shared with Liam. Both paths seemed impossible, yet he knew he couldn't continue living like this. The door creaked open, and Liam stepped inside, his expression wary. He had heard the raised voices and couldn't stay away, even though he knew his presence would only make things worse. Sophia turned to him, her composure finally cracking. Did you know? She asked, her voice trembling. Did you know how much you were destroying? Liam's face fell. I never wanted this, he said quietly. I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia. I didn't even want to admit it to myself. Her anger flared. But you did. Both of you did. And now what? I'm just supposed to walk away while you two figure out whatever this is. Liam looked at Ethan, then back at Sophia. No, he said firmly. You don't deserve that. You deserve someone who loves you fully, without hesitation. That's why I'm leaving. Ethan's head snapped up. Liam, don't. I have to, Liam interrupted, his voice resolute. This isn't about me anymore. It's about doing what's right. Sophia wiped her eyes and stood, her movements deliberate. You're both cowards, she said, her voice laced with bitterness. You let this spiral out of control, and now I'm the one who has to pick up the pieces. Without another word, she walked out, leaving Ethan and Liam alone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Ethan stood and approached Liam. You don't have to go, he said softly. I do, Liam replied, his voice filled with sadness. If I stay, it'll only make things worse, for you, for her, and for me. Ethan reached for him, but Liam stepped back, shaking his head. Take care of yourself, Ethan. And take care of her. She didn't deserve this. With that, Liam turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the silence of the empty room. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly alone.